The unexpected ambassador. The lunch break interruption. Marcus Webb was having the kind of Tuesday that made him question his career choices. 3 client meetings had gone sideways, his coffee maker was broken, and the sandwich from the lobby deli tasted like cardboard wrapped in disappointment. He stood by his office window on the 32nd floor, watching the city bustle below while mentally preparing for his afternoon session with 2 companies that had been trying to sue each other into bankruptcy for 6 months. That's when the sky caught fire. A streak of silver and blue tore through the clouds, trailing what looked like liquid starlight. Marcus blinked, wondering if his lack of caffeine was causing hallucinations. The object grew larger, heading straight for the plaza between his building and the courthouse across the street. The crash landing. The impact sent tremors through the entire district. Car alarms wailed in harmony as a crystalline ship the size of a city bus embedded itself in the concrete plaza, steam rising from its hull like morning mist. Marcus grabbed his tie, loosened it, and headed for the elevator. In his 15 years as a corporate mediator, he'd learned that somebody always needed to talk things out, and whoever was piloting that ship probably had some explaining to do. By the time he reached street level, a crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. The ship's hull was unlike anything he'd seen, appearing to be grown rather than built, with surfaces that shifted between transparent and opaque like living crystal. A section of the hull dissolved, revealing an opening. What emerged made the crowd take several steps back. The first contact. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in what looked like organic armor that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. 4 arms, each ending in hands that possessed too many joints, and a head that was vaguely humanoid but stretched vertically, with eyes like molten gold. When it spoke, its voice resonated with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am Warprime Nexus of the Kethvar Dominion," it announced, surveying the gathered humans with what might have been disappointment. "This world is now under Kethvar rule. Your species will submit or face obliteration." The crowd murmured nervously. Someone screamed. A few people started running. Marcus stepped forward, straightening his tie. "Excuse me," he said, using the same tone he employed when interrupting heated boardroom arguments. "Marcus Webb, Webb and Associates Mediation Services. Before we get into the whole obliteration discussion, could we maybe start with what brought you here? I'm sensing some underlying issues that might be worth addressing." The confusion begins. Warprime Nexus turned its golden eyes toward Marcus, and for a moment, neither spoke. The alien's armor patterns shifted from aggressive red to something closer to confused yellow. "You do not flee," Nexus observed, its voice carrying notes of genuine puzzlement. "Your species' reputation suggested immediate panic responses to conquest declarations." "Well," Marcus said, checking his watch, "I've got about 45 minutes before my next appointment, so I figured we might as well sort this out. You mentioned submission or obliteration, which sounds like a pretty standard ultimatum, but in my experience, ultimatums usually mask the real issue. What's really going on here?" The Warprime's 4 arms gestured in what might have been frustration. "What is going on is the expansion of the Kethvar Dominion. We have claimed 317 worlds. We are the apex predators of 17 star systems. We do not negotiate." "I hear that a lot," Marcus nodded sympathetically. "But here's the thing about not negotiating. It usually means someone's not getting their actual needs met. Tell me about these 317 worlds. How's that working out for you?" The unexpected therapy session. The question seemed to catch Nexus off guard. Its armor patterns cycled through several colors before settling on a dim blue that Marcus somehow interpreted as contemplative. "The conquered worlds provide resources, tribute, acknowledgement of Kethvar's superiority," Nexus said, but something in its tone suggested uncertainty. "Okay, but how does that make you feel?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, you've got 317 victories under your belt. You should be feeling pretty accomplished, right?" Instead, you're here starting a fight with world number 318. That suggests to me that maybe the previous victories aren't giving you what you actually need. The War Prime stared at him for a long moment. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, but instead of panic, people seemed to be watching with the fascination usually reserved for street performers or particularly dramatic reality TV. The Kethvar do not require emotional satisfaction, Nexus said firmly. We require dominance. Right, but dominance over what? Or who? And why? Marcus gestured toward the crowd. Look around. You've got everyone's attention. You could probably have this whole plaza bowing down in terror right now if that's what you wanted. But you're still here talking to me instead of doing the dominance thing. What does that tell us? The realization. The alien's golden eyes narrowed as it processed this observation. Its armor patterns shifted through a rapid spectrum of colors that Marcus was starting to recognize as emotional responses. You are attempting to manipulate my psychological state, Nexus accused, but without the earlier aggression. I'm asking questions, Marcus corrected. Big difference. Manipulation would be if I was trying to get you to do something that wasn't in your best interest. I'm trying to figure out what your best interest actually is, because I'm pretty sure it's not standing in a plaza arguing with a guy in a cheap suit about feelings. The War Prime was quiet for nearly a minute, its armor cycling through what Marcus was beginning to think of as confusion colors. In 317 conquests, Nexus said slowly, no being has ever asked what I require beyond dominance. Well, Marcus said, glancing at his watch again, maybe that's part of the problem. You've been dealing with people who were too scared to have a real conversation. Fear makes people stupid, and stupid people don't ask good questions. But here's the thing about humans: we're really, really good at being too tired or too busy or too annoyed to be properly scared. It's probably our most annoying trait. The alien tilted its elongated head, studying Marcus with what seemed like new interest. You are not afraid of obliteration? I'm afraid of a lot of things, Marcus admitted. Mostly my credit card bill and whether I'm going to have to work weekends to catch up on the Henderson merger. But obliteration? That's kind of abstract. Plus, you seem like you've got more going on than just wanting to blow things up. So how about we skip the destruction part and figure out what you actually came here for? War Prime Nexus stood in the middle of a human plaza, surrounded by a species that should have been cowering in terror, and for the first time in its conquest career, found itself genuinely uncertain about what came next. The warriors' confusion. The budget meeting from hell. General Harrison Stone had been through 3 wars, 2 divorces, and countless congressional hearings, but nothing had prepared him for the quarterly budget review meeting that was currently sucking the will to live from everyone in Conference Room C. For the past 2 hours, he'd been listening to procurement officers argue about the cost difference between regular toilet paper and the premium version that apparently cost 47 cents more per roll. His aide, Lieutenant Colonel Janet Morrison, slid him a note that read, "Sir, if I have to hear another word about bathroom tissue specifications, I'm requesting a transfer to active combat duty." Stone was about to respond when his secure phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Then another. Then his regular phone, his backup phone, and the conference room's landline all started ringing simultaneously. "Stone here," he answered the secure line, grateful for any interruption. "General, we have a situation downtown," came the voice of Major Phillips from the Emergency Response Center. "Unidentified aircraft has crashed in Federal Plaza. The occupant is requesting to speak with Earth's military commander." Stone glanced around the room where Colonel Henderson was still passionately defending the ergonomic benefits of 3-ply tissue. "I'll be right there." The arrival at the scene. 20 minutes later, Stone arrived at Federal Plaza to find what looked like the world's strangest diplomatic incident. A crowd had gathered around an alien that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd watched too many horror movies, but instead of running in terror, people were taking selfies. At the center of it all stood a civilian in a rumpled suit, apparently having a casual conversation with something that should have sent everyone screaming for the hills. General Stone. The civilian extended his hand. Marcus Webb. I've been having a chat with Warprime Nexus here about their conquest objectives. I think there might be some communication issues we can work through. Stone stared at the alien, then at Marcus, then back at the alien. Are you telling me you've been negotiating with an extraterrestrial invasion force? Well, negotiating might be strong, Marcus replied. More like trying to figure out what they actually want. Turns out, it's complicated. The military assessment. The alien, Warprime Nexus, stepped forward with what Stone recognized as military bearing, despite its decidedly non-human appearance. General Harrison Stone, Nexus said, its voice carrying harmonics that made Stone's teeth ache. I have come to accept your world surrender and discuss terms of integration into the Kethvar Dominion. Stone looked at his watch, then at Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who was trying not to laugh. Okay, let's talk terms. But first, I need to understand your operational parameters. How many ships in your fleet? What's your logistical support structure? Are we looking at occupation or just tribute collection? The question seemed to catch Nexus off guard. Its armor patterns shifted through several colors that Stone was beginning to suspect indicated emotional states. Your species responds to conquest declarations with logistics inquiries? Nexus asked. Standard operating procedure, Stone replied matter-of-factly. Before I can recommend surrender terms to the Joint Chiefs, I need to understand what we're surrendering to. For instance, your current force projection appears to be 1 ship, 1 personnel. That's either a reconnaissance mission or you're working with a severely limited budget. The strategic discussion. Morrison stepped forward, pulling out a tablet. Sir, should I run this through our standard threat assessment protocol? Good thinking, Morrison. Stone turned back to Nexus. Warprime, I'm going to need some basic intel. What's your command structure look like? How many worlds are actively under Kethvar control versus just paying tribute? What's your supply line situation for extended operations? Nexus's armor patterns cycled rapidly through what Stone was learning to interpret as confusion. You wish to know our strategic capabilities before surrendering? Of course, Stone said. Look, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've surrendered to budget committees, congressional oversight panels, and my ex-wife's divorce attorney. But I've never surrendered without understanding what I'm getting into. What's your occupation policy? Are we talking about resource extraction, population management, infrastructure integration? Do you have existing templates for planetary governance, or are we starting from scratch here? The alien stared at him for a long moment. In 317 conquests, no military commander has requested a briefing on post-conquest administration. Well, that explains a lot, Stone muttered. Morrison, make a note. Alien conquerors apparently have the same problem as the Pentagon: no long-term planning. The logistics nightmare. Let me paint you a picture, Warprime, Stone continued, warming to the subject. Earth has approximately 7.8 billion people, spread across 6 inhabited continents, speaking over 7,000 languages. We've got 195 recognized nations, most of which can't agree on what to have for lunch, let alone surrender terms. He gestured toward the crowd that was still growing around them. You see that group over there taking pictures? That's not awe or terror. That's Tuesday afternoon entertainment. By tonight, you'll be trending on social media with hashtags like #AlienBuddy or #SpaceInvaderFail. Tomorrow, there'll be merchandise. Nexus's head tilted at an angle that suggested deep confusion. Your population would commercialize their own conquest? Oh, absolutely, Morrison chimed in. Sir, should I check if anyone's already filed trademark applications for Warprime Nexus? Probably too late, Stone replied. By now, someone's designing t-shirts. He turned back to the alien. Here's what I don't understand about your operation. You've got 317 successful conquests, but you're standing in a plaza asking me to surrender instead of, conquering. That suggests either a policy change or a resource allocation problem. The uncomfortable questions. The alien's golden eyes seem to lose some of their earlier intensity. The Kethvar dominion expands through demonstration of superior force and acceptance of inevitable defeat. Right, but that's a process, not an outcome, Stone pointed out. What happens after the demonstration? Who runs the day-to-day operations? How do you maintain control across 300 worlds with what appears to be a one-ship expeditionary force? For the first time since the conversation began, Warprime Nexus seemed genuinely uncertain. The conquered worlds acknowledge Kethvar's superiority. They provide tribute. They cease resistance. Okay, but who's collecting the tribute? Who's managing the supply chains? Who's handling dispute resolution between conquered worlds? Stone was getting into his element now. You can't run a multi-system empire on, because we said so, and good intentions. Trust me, I've seen congressional budgets. It doesn't work. Morrison leaned over. Sir, this sounds familiar. What do you mean? Remember the Afghanistan drawdown briefings? Same questions, same non-answers. Stone nodded grimly. Warprime, I think you might have a strategic problem that goes beyond just conquering Earth. The revelation. Nexus stood silently for nearly 2 minutes, its armor patterns cycling through colors that Stone was starting to recognize as deep contemplation mixed with growing concern. General Stone, Nexus said finally, in your military experience, what happens when conquest objectives are achieved but long-term governance structures are inadequate? Stone exchanged a look with Morrison. Well, historically speaking, you get insurgencies, resource conflicts, administrative breakdown, and eventually either complete withdrawal or permanent occupation with unsustainable resource allocation. And if these problems exist across multiple conquered territories simultaneously? Then you've got what we call in the business a complete strategic clusterfuck, Stone said bluntly. Warprime, how long has it been since you've actually been back to world number 1 on your conquest list? The alien's silence was more telling than any answer could have been. Morrison, Stone said quietly, I don't think we're being invaded. I think we're being consulted. The therapist's session. The unexpected appointment. Dr. Benjamin Rivers was having the kind of day that made him grateful for his profession's emphasis on confidentiality. His 2 p.m. appointment had cancelled after admitting they'd been lying about their homework assignments for 3 months. His 3 p.m. had spent the entire session arguing that their problems were everyone else's fault, and his 4 p.m. was 20 minutes late, which meant his carefully maintained schedule was falling apart. He was updating his notes when his secretary's voice came through the intercom, sounding unusually strained. Dr. Rivers? Your 4:30 is here. And, it's not Mrs. Patterson. Before he could respond, his office door opened to reveal something that definitely wasn't on his appointment book. The being that entered had to duck to fit through the doorway, its crystalline armor catching the afternoon light streaming through his windows. 4 arms, golden eyes, and an aura of barely contained lethality that somehow reminded him of his teenage nephew after too much caffeine. Dr. Benjamin Rivers, the creature asked, its voice carrying harmonics that made his filing cabinet vibrate. I am Warprime Nexus of the Kethvar Dominion. I require consultation. Ben set down his pen and activated what he privately called his crisis mode, calm. In 15 years of practice, he'd dealt with everything from corporate executives having breakdowns to teenagers convinced they were vampires. Professional curiosity warred with self-preservation instincts as he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Please, have a seat. Though, you might be more comfortable on the couch. The intake session begins. Warprime Nexus settled onto the leather couch with surprising grace, its armor patterns shifting from aggressive red to something more subdued. Ben grabbed his notepad and slipped into professional mode. So, Nexus, what brings you in today? I have been experiencing difficulties with my current assignment, the alien said, its golden eyes focused somewhere beyond Ben's shoulder. Two of your species have raised questions that are causing what I believe you might term cognitive dissonance. Ben nodded, making notes. Can you tell me about these questions? A human named Marcus Webb asked me what I actually need, beyond dominance. Another called General Stone inquired about the long-term strategic implications of my conquest methodology. Nexus's armor patterns shifted to what looked like frustrated yellow. These are not questions that should be relevant to a war prime. But they feel relevant to you? The alien's silence stretched long enough that Ben started to wonder if he'd accidentally triggered some kind of diplomatic incident. Finally, Nexus spoke. For the first time in my existence, I find myself uncertain about the purpose of my actions. The deeper issues. Ben leaned forward slightly, recognizing the tone of someone approaching a breakthrough. Tell me about your role as War Prime. What does that mean in HFY society? I am the apex expression of our species' evolutionary development, Nexus recited, sounding like it was quoting from memory. I exist to expand the dominion, to demonstrate our superiority, to claim worlds in the name of HFY supremacy. That sounds like a job description, Ben observed. How does it feel, personally? Another long pause. The armor patterns cycled through several colors Ben was beginning to interpret as emotional responses. I had not considered that it should feel like anything, Nexus admitted. War primes do not typically engage in introspection. But you're here, talking to a therapist instead of conquering the planet, Ben pointed out gently. What do you think that means? The alien's four hands clenched and unclenched in what might have been agitation. It means I am malfunctioning. Or it means you're growing, Ben suggested. In my experience, questioning your purpose isn't a malfunction. It's usually a sign that you've outgrown your current understanding of yourself. The breakthrough moment. Nexus leaned forward, its golden eyes focusing intently on Ben. Dr. Rivers, I have conquered 317 worlds. I am feared across 17 star systems. I am the nightmare that apex predators have nightmares about. And how has that worked out for you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ben watched as the alien's armor patterns shifted through what looked like an entire emotional spectrum before settling on something that looked disturbingly like sadness. I do not know, Nexus said quietly. I have never asked. What would happen if you did ask? That is, not how conquest works. Ben set down his notepad. Nexus, can I share something with you? I've been doing therapy for 15 years, and I've noticed something interesting about people who define themselves entirely by their achievements. They're usually running from something. The alien's head tilted in that curious way Ben was learning to recognize as deep thought. What would a war prime be running from? That's what we're here to figure out, Ben said. But first, I want to try something. Instead of telling me what you're supposed to do, or what your species expects, tell me what you want. The uncomfortable truth. The silence that followed was so complete that Ben could hear the traffic outside his window, the hum of his air conditioning, even his own heartbeat. War Prime Nexus sat motionless, its armor patterns cycling through colors Ben had never seen before. I do not understand the question, Nexus said finally. When you're not being a War Prime, when you're just Nexus, what makes you happy? What are you curious about? What would you do if you could do anything? War primes do not have personal desires separate from their function. But you're asking me questions about your function, Ben pointed out. That suggests curiosity, which is definitely a personal desire. What else are you curious about? Another long pause. When Nexus spoke again, its voice was different somehow, less resonant, more personal. Your species fascinates me, it admitted. In 317 conquests, no world has responded to my presence with questions, negotiation attempts, or requests for consultation. Your people treat conquest declarations like business proposals. Ben smiled. And how does that make you feel? Confused. Intrigued. Somewhat relieved. Relieved how? The alien's armor patterns shifted to something that looked almost peaceful. For the first time in my existence, I am having conversations instead of delivering ultimatums. It is. Nexus searched for words. It is pleasant. The realization. Ben leaned back in his chair, watching as one of the galaxy's most feared predators discovered the concept of enjoyment. Nexus, can I ask you something that might be difficult? I believe this entire conversation qualifies as difficult, Dr. Rivers. Fair enough. Here's my question: what if the reason you're questioning your purpose isn't because you're malfunctioning, but because you've finally found something that actually fulfills you? The alien stared at him for a long moment. You are suggesting that conversation with humans is more satisfying than conquest? I'm suggesting that maybe you've been using conquest as a substitute for connection, Ben said gently. Think about it. You travel across the galaxy, seeking acknowledgement of your power, demanding submission from other species. But what you're really asking for is recognition, isn't it? You want to be seen, understood, valued. Warprime Nexus sat very still, its armor patterns cycling through what Ben was beginning to recognize as profound emotional processing. Dr. Rivers, Nexus said slowly, are you telling me that I have been conquering worlds because I am lonely? The question was asked with such vulnerable honesty that Ben felt his heart break a little. What do you think? He asked softly. The galaxy's most feared predator put its massive head in its four hands and made a sound that, despite the alien harmonics, was unmistakably the sound of someone crying. I think, Nexus said through what sounded like tears, that I have made a terrible mistake. 317 terrible mistakes. Ben reached for the tissue box on his desk, then paused, realizing he had no idea if alien biochemistry worked the same way. Instead, he leaned forward and said the words that had helped countless patients begin their healing journey. The good news is, it's never too late to make different choices. The janitor's wisdom. The night shift encounter. Frank Rodriguez had been cleaning office buildings for 23 years, and he'd learned that the best conversations happened after midnight when the world got quiet and people's defenses came down. He'd talked scared executives through panic attacks, listened to security guards worry about their kids, and even convinced a few would-be jumpers to come back inside from fire escapes. But he'd never had a heart-to-heart with an 8-foot-tall alien sitting in the lobby of the federal building at 2:17 a.m. Warprime Nexus sat hunched on one of the marble benches, its crystalline armor dim and colorless in the security lighting. The being looked, for lack of a better word, defeated. Frank had seen that posture plenty of times, usually on people who'd just gotten some life-changing bad news. Rough day? Frank asked, setting down his mop bucket and leaning on his cart. The alien's golden eyes looked up, and Frank was surprised to see what looked like exhaustion in them. I have been told that I am experiencing an existential crisis, Nexus said, its voice lacking the harmonics that had made Windows vibrate earlier. I am not entirely certain what this means, but it feels unpleasant. Frank nodded sympathetically. Yeah, those'll get you. Mind if I work while we talk? I've got 6 more floors to get through before dawn. The philosophy of floor cleaning. As Frank began mopping the lobby floor with practiced efficiency, he found himself genuinely curious about his unusual companion. So what's got you sitting in a government building lobby at 2 in the morning? Most folks having existential crises end up in bars or church parking lots. I have spent the day speaking with 3 of your species, Nexus explained, watching Frank work with what seemed like fascination. Each conversation has revealed fundamental flaws in my understanding of purpose, success, and satisfaction. I find myself questioning everything I believed about my existence. Sounds about right, Frank said, working his way across the marble floor in smooth, efficient strokes. That's how wisdom works. Sneaks up on you when you're not looking and makes you realize everything you thought you knew was maybe only half the story. The alien's head tilted in that curious way Frank was learning to recognize as deep interest. You speak of wisdom as if it were a living thing. Isn't it? Frank paused in his mopping to look at Nexus directly. I mean, think about it. Wisdom isn't something you can buy or steal or demand. It shows up when it wants to, usually through other people asking you questions you never thought to ask yourself. The unexpected teacher. Nexus shifted on the bench, its armor patterns showing the first hint of color Frank had seen since arriving. Frank Rodriguez, the alien said formally, are you considered a wise person among your species? Frank laughed, a genuine sound that echoed in the empty lobby. Me? Nah, I'm just a janitor. I clean floors and empty trash cans. But I've been doing it for 23 years, mostly night shifts, and you know what night shift teaches you? What does it teach you? That everybody's got something going on, Frank said, resuming his methodical cleaning. The hotshot executives with the corner offices? Half of them are scared they're frauds. The security guards? They're working 2 jobs to put their kids through college. The cleaning ladies? Some of them have degrees in engineering but can't get work because of immigration status. He gestured around the empty building. During the day, this place is full of people pretending to have their lives figured out. At night, when it's just me and whoever's working late, people tell the truth. The deeper conversation. Warprime Nexus stood and began walking alongside Frank as he moved to the next section of floor. In your experience, what is the truth that people tell at night? Frank considered this while wringing out his mop. That they're all just making it up as they go along. That success isn't what they thought it would be. That the things they thought would make them happy just made them tired. He glanced at the alien. That they're lonely, mostly. The word lonely seemed to hit Nexus like a physical blow. Its armor patterns shifted to what Frank was beginning to recognize as emotional distress. The therapist, Dr. Rivers, suggested that my conquest of 317 worlds might have been motivated by loneliness, Nexus said quietly. Makes sense to me, Frank replied matter-of-factly. I've seen a lot of people trying to prove they matter by making other people smaller. Never works, though. Just makes everyone miserable. But I am Warprime of the Kethvar Dominion. I am the apex expression of my species' evolution. I am feared across 17 star systems. Frank stopped mopping and looked at Nexus with the kind of gentle directness that came from years of talking to people at their lowest points. And how's that working out for you? The moment of truth. The alien stared at him for a long moment, then let out a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could carry the weight of centuries. It is not working out well, Frank Rodriguez. Call me Frank. And yeah, I figured. You've got that look. What look? The look people get when they realize they've been climbing the wrong mountain their whole life. Frank resumed mopping, his movement steady and meditative. Seen it plenty of times. Usually happens to folks around 40, 50 years old. They wake up one day and realize they've got everything they thought they wanted, and they feel emptier than when they started. Nexus walked in silence for a few minutes, watching Frank work with what seemed like genuine interest. Frank, may I ask you something? Shoot. You clean floors for a living. This is not considered prestigious work among your species. Yet you seem content. How is this possible? Frank smiled, pausing to lean on his mop handle. Because I know what I'm here for. Which is? To make things a little better than I found them, Frank said simply. Every night, I come in, and this place is a mess. People have tracked in mud, spilled coffee, left trash everywhere. It looks like chaos. By morning, it's clean, organized, ready for another day. I turned chaos into order, and that matters. The revelation about purpose. Warprime Nexus stopped walking and stared at Frank with an intensity that made the janitor briefly wonder if he'd said something wrong. You find satisfaction in service to others? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds fancy, Frank chuckled. But yeah, I guess so. I do my job well, people have a cleaner, nicer place to work. Their day starts a little better because of something I did. That feels good. But you receive no acknowledgement, no tribute, no demonstrations of your power. Don't need Frank said, getting back to work. I know what I did. The building knows what I did. That's enough. The alien was quiet for so long that Frank wondered if he'd gone too deep into philosophy for 2:30 a.m. But when he looked up, he saw something in those golden eyes that looked like wonder. Frank, Nexus said slowly, I think you may be the wisest person I have encountered on this world. Nah, Frank replied, but he was smiling. I just figured out that the secret to being happy isn't making yourself bigger. It's making the world a little bit better. The transformation begins. As they reached the elevator bank, Frank noticed that Nexus's armor patterns had shifted to something he hadn't seen before, a soft, steady blue that somehow felt peaceful. Frank, if someone had spent their entire existence making the world worse, is it possible for them to change? Frank looked at the alien, seeing past the intimidating exterior to something that looked remarkably like hope. Brother, he said gently, if I've learned anything in 23 years of cleaning up other people's messes, it's that there's no mess so big it can't be cleaned up, one piece at a time. The question isn't whether you can change. The question is whether you want to. Warprime Nexus, conqueror of worlds, stood in the empty lobby of a government building and made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. I want to learn how to make things better instead of worse, it said. Frank nodded and handed Nexus a spray bottle and a cloth. Then let's start with the windows on floor 2. Nothing teaches you about starting over like making something dirty clean again.